Hi, I'm Gatlin Voelker, and welcome to Beyond the Bar with Jack and Brandon.
So Brandon, it's our first video podcast. I know that people have been anxiously awaiting this. Is this a podcast? Is this a video cast? What do we call this?
I think it's both.
Both?
Yeah.
Because when I think of podcast, I think of like people having a bunch of listeners and going on some platform. But we're like putting out there on social media.
I think I should have a headset on to be a true podcast.
The headset look would be pretty good. So I do think that that would definitely help you. Do you think that adds to our intelligence level a little bit?
Yeah, I'd look like Joe Rogan then.
Okay. Sort of like you have a tie on and I don't.
Well, I had to go to court today and be a lawyer.
But we could take the tie off. But you kind of like maybe.
If I took the time to tie the tie, I'm going to wear the tie.
All right, so the tie stays on.
Right, because I wore it today.
So let's talk about our topic today, because I know that this is the holiday season, right? So we've got a lot of families spend a lot of time together during the holiday season. A lot of families enjoy that time that they spend together during the holiday season, and other times they don't. So what we often see is divorce work picks up in January. Nobody necessarily files divorce during the holiday season, but after the battle of whether you want fried turkey or plain turkey, whether you allow blow-ups in your household or you don't like the blow-ups.
My wife does not like blow-ups in the front yard.
We are a blow-up household, so we will stay married together because we both like our blow-ups in the front yard. But whatever your issue is, sometimes it comes up during the holiday season. So we thought today, since we are in the middle of the Thanksgiving holiday season, we would talk about the urban legends of family law.
You can't spell family without lies, according to Vince Vaughn.
You can't
Spell family.
Spell family without lies. That's kind of a harsh approach. So let's kind of get right into it. Some of the, what I would say, urban legends or the things we hear from people. So I'm not happy with the blow-ups in my front yard. I'm tired of dealing with them. I better race and file immediately so that I get a better standing in court. Myth, truth?
Well, truth based on what people call and think they need to file first, but not true. I don't think they've ever even kept stats of who, quote unquote, wins or loses a divorce by who filed first. But there's definitely a large number of people that believe they need to file first because they think it gives them the upper hand, which is simply not true.
Unless you're maybe looking at venue or jurisdiction, right? There could be an argument if you want to file in one state over the other to maybe gain an advantage. So just sort of walk us through that as to how long you'd have to live somewhere to be able to file divorce there.
I mean, really all you gotta do is establish jurisdiction for purposes of filing for a divorce. Now, where it does get interesting, which is I think kind of a safeguard, is the when kids are involved, you do have the Uniform Child Custody Act, which is gonna look at the most 6 months where the kids spent the most time, and that state should have jurisdiction. But that's state jurisdiction, not county. And as you and I know, counties can make all the difference these days on, what county you may or may not want to be in when you file for your divorce.
We'll talk through that a little bit, because obviously, there are state statutes and there's case law out there, which are appellate decisions. But why is it an issue whether someone might file in Kenton County versus McCracken County versus Fayette County?
Well, I mean, let's just go back to, the Kentucky's presumption of shared parenting, is a law that's been around for probably 5 to 8 years. But I mean, I was divorced back in 2009. As long as I've pretty much been practicing, Boone, Kenton, and Campbell have pretty much had shared parenting, not by operation of statute, but rather by operation of, I think, the general view of the judges in the more urbanized counties that there was a belief that shared parenting was better than the traditional one parent has the kid every other weekend and takes them to McDonald's for a couple hours on a Wednesday. So I think that presumption takes a little bit of that perhaps county shopping off the table, but I think that's a prime example, because what was Northern Kentucky was not the rest of the state.
That's right. So let's talk about that presumption a little bit, because we'll have people call here and say, hey, it is my absolute Kentucky constitutional right to be able to see my child 50% of the time. That's not the law, is it?
No, it's a presumption, meaning there's a presumption that that should happen, but it doesn't mean that that's what will happen. It just means that unless there's good evidence shown why somebody shouldn't have it, it's presumed that you should have shared parenting, but it's not absolute.
So what would be some of the examples or reasons that maybe someone wouldn't necessarily enjoy shared parenting?
Obviously if you can't, and you hate to say it, if you can't provide proper bedroom, lodging, and all for a child, it could be one. I think those are the difficult cases. I think those are where judges struggle, because there are people that are great parents, but maybe they just don't have the financial means. And I don't think parenting should ever boil down to whether you can financially afford it or not. But I also think the bigger one, and again, it's tough because on one hand, you need to work, you need to earn a living, but let's be honest, if you work second shift and you work 2 to 10 at night, it's going to be difficult to co-parent your child. Or if you work second shift till midnight, when your kids are in school, it's going to be difficult. So at that point, you hope that both the court and your ex-spouse to be are willing to work together to try and make that work. But I think work schedule is the biggest thing that impacts shared parenting.
And sometimes people are actually punished by working harder, correct? I mean, if you have a spouse who doesn't work and you have another spouse that maybe is working 15, 16 hours a day, the spouse that doesn't work might actually be in a better position to take care of that child.
Exactly. I think you and I think we both ended up doing a case a few years ago where a guy worked nights and didn't have shared parenting, and then it was unfortunate. The plant closed, literally just shut down. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden he said, hey, now I have a more traditional 8 to 5 job. I'm ready to step up and be and co-parent. And at that point, the mother was kind of like, whoa, this is upsetting my apple cart. I'm used to being the primary provider. And, it eventually ended up in that where it should have been with shared parenting, but it was kind of a shock to both of them, And I think that's, again, I think that it's balancing. I think people get a routine going, and it's difficult when things change.
Well, because it's best interest to the child, not necessarily best interest to the parent, right?
Correct.
Because, again, nobody wins or loses in family court. Whenever there's children involved, they're looking at best interest of the child, and in many times, the parent who's working 15, 16 hours a day might feel that they're getting punished because now they're not the primary caregiver. But in best interest of that child, the person who's able to stay at home might actually be better for that child.
Well, and I think the thing too is you get sometimes maybe the person who was more the caregiver versus the one who maybe worked more. And I think sometimes, you hate to say it, there's people that want shared parenting because it's a deduction in child support. But I also think that if you're, if you have Mondays and Tuesdays and you're the President of the United States, I mean, that's an extreme example, but let's say you're a doctor and you have a surgery scheduled or something, and it's your day. The one thing about shared parenting that I think people need to understand is maybe when a couple was married, one played that role more of primary caregiver, but with shared parenting, you both have to be primary caregivers on your days. It's not fair for one spouse to say, oh, I'm busy that day even though it's my day, because they perceive their job or to be more important. That's not the case. They got to step up. Right. And I think when people understand that, it solves more of the shared parenting issues. When I think you have a mutual respect that, maybe I love my kids to death, but maybe it is difficult. Maybe I have a job that's 15, 16 hours and I can't do it. And that's usually, as an attorney, I'm trying to figure out, is this truly about parenting, or you hate to say it, or is it about the almighty dollar? They're worried about their child support.
So let's shift a little bit into that and talk about the almighty dollar, because that is certainly a significant factor in divorces. So there have been some tweaks to the law in the last few years that now the guidelines specifically deal with shared parenting. There's there's no subjectivity left necessarily with the judges. And it truly is a situation where you are getting an increase or decrease in child support based on the amount of time you're caring for the child.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically cuts that number in half if you have shared parenting, which is again another example. Boone, Ketton, and Campbell were doing that well before shared parenting. They did we run it as if one party had the children, if the other, and they took the difference. Campbell, Judge Wieste used to use the Colorado rule. So it's kind of interesting that the
But-
judges in here ultimately became what the General Assembly took 10 to 15
Sure.
years to adopt.
Sure. So let's kind of go back. So we are now unhappy with our family situation over Thanksgiving. Our spouse has cooked
Can't
fried.
spell family without lies.
That's right.
Vince Vaughn said that in Four Christmases.
Our spouse has cooked fried turkey for the 5th year in a row. Has messed up everything. Watched football all day on Thanksgiving, and we're just tired of it. So we think that it's important to run to the courthouse first and file, which we do. But now that spouse is saying, I'm not giving up my chair. I'm not giving up my room. I'm not leaving this house because, by golly, I don't want to vacate the house because I'll lose it. Let's talk about that. Another urban legend?
Urban legend. I mean, I don't know where, I don't even think AI comes up with that answer, but there are people that believe that, and I will say this, AI seems to be getting worse at
I
giving legal
100%
advice.
agree. AI is getting worse.
I mean, it's like, how could it be digressing? I guess it's good for us. It's not going to maybe take us over. But there is definitely a view that if I don't hunker down, it's almost like I have to hold the fort. And it's like, no, that's not the case at all. The family court, presumption of shared parenting, division of marital assets have nothing to do with whether you both are staying in that house concurrently while the divorce is proceeding or you choose to separate. I think that I think a lot of times people will stay under the same roof due to financial reasons. Obviously it's probably a little easier if you can financially swing it to kind of separate and try to, be peaceful about that. Because obviously if you're going in the middle of the divorce, the worst thing you got going is you're both living under the same roof. But yeah, I mean, there are people that are like, if I leave, I'm going to lose my kids. It has nothing to do with that.
But but my kids are 12 and 13 years old. Aren't they going to be able to pick where they want to live?
That's another myth. I don't know if it's 12 or 14, but you'll have people call and say, well, my kids are the age they choose where they want to live. And you're like, again, did AI tell you that? That you won't find that law in, at least in Kentucky, I don't even think in Ohio, but there's this perception that kids can pick where they want to live. That's not the case. Now, as kids get older, it can become more difficult. And I think that there is a provision that talks about the wishes of the kid. I think that a child who can articulate to a judge why they should or shouldn't be with a parent, that's a possibility. But it can't because mom or dad let me spend 8 hours on TikTok a day. If anything, that'll probably swing it the other way.
Right, so as maybe the kid gets older, maybe their opinion becomes more relevant, but there is certainly no magic number for when a kid can choose who he or she lives with until they turn 18.
Correct.
At 18, they're an adult, they can do whatever they want.
Yep.
What about 18-year-olds that are still in high school? How do they fit into all of this?
Well, they're an adult for purposes of choosing where they want to live, but for purposes of child support, you still owe child support until the child graduates high school.
What if I have a kid who has taken a COVID year or two and is going to be in high school till they're 20?
It caps at 19.
So you can't milk the system and have your kid stay in school a couple more years to get a little more child support?
No.
So one other urban legend that I get a lot of phone calls on and emails about is, hey, I'm paying child support. I have a right to see my kid.
Yep, that'll just land you in jail for either contempt or flagrant non-support.
So you mean if I don't see my kid, I can't just stop paying child support?
No.
Really? AI told me that.
Well, AI does it, and just general being upset at the system leads people to think that.
Is there any correlation between child support and parenting time?
Nope.
Other than how it's calculated, right?
Exactly.
So unfortunately, again, if you see your kid less, under the law, you're actually going to pay more child support than if you see them an equal amount.
Correct.
One final kind of financial piece that we'll get into is maintenance. That's always kind of the the sticky wicket, and Ohio's a little different than Kentucky. Kentucky maintenance law is really probably harder to get maintenance than people would think.
I think that people, again, another urban legend or myth, people call and immediately jump to a standard of living. But Kentucky actually uses a two-prong approach. You have to be able to show that you financially can't reasonably provide for your necessary reasonable means. If you meet that prong, then they get more into that standard of living. And I think a lot of people jump past that first prong, and when you find out that, you know, maybe you were not working, but you have a professional degree that you could certainly rejoin the workforce and you could earn a certain level of living, you're probably not going to get maintenance. You may get temporary maintenance, but you're not going to just get temporary, you're not going to get permanent maintenance. And I think also, just because maybe a person didn't work, but they have the ability, and especially if they have some level of training or professional degree, you're going to be told you got to go back to work. And I think that's pretty uniform.
So as far as going back to work, whether it be a maintenance analysis or imputing on child support, kind of go through the analysis that you see judges go through in trying to determine what somebody's imputed wage should be or what they should have calculated for purposes of support.
You know, I mean, as an attorney, I mean, I literally, again, I don't really use the AI, but like if you get on and somebody has somebody's a certified speech therapist, because I've had that before. You get on Glassdoor. I mean, Glassdoor, there's all kinds of tools that you can find out what St. Elizabeth, Children's, you can find out what jobs are open. You could see just by the amount of volume of listing, and then also their range of salary, and you can use that. And I think that's the kind of proof people put on. The other thing that's overlooked sometimes in maintenance that I see a lot of is you could have high income earner and maybe they've accumulated a ton of assets to where they own their house, they paid off their cars, and it could be, well, this person makes all this money, I should get maintenance. It's like, no, not necessarily, because you already have it. You have no house payment, you have no car payment, you really have no overhead in life. And so one party may make a lot more money, but you're probably not going to get maintenance that way. So I think that's another thing that's overlooked. There's case law that says, what are the assets you're getting out of the divorce? That comes into play on whether you get maintenance or not.
Right, so let's just kind of, from a practical matter, you got a stay-at-home dad, and frankly, we're seeing more and more of that, right? You're seeing more of people, the traditional gender role switching, where you have stay-at-home dads. So you have a stay-at-home dad that maybe was a licensed, let's say, engineer, but he's taking care of the kids and he hasn't worked in 10 years. Wife has a good job. They have decent assets. So under that scenario, we're probably looking at maybe a little temporary maintenance to allow him to get back on his feet, but there's certainly not going to be a long, permanent maintenance award. Depends on the judge. 6 to 18 months to probably allow that person to get back on their feet and re-enter the job market in a job they should make.
I would agree.
And the amount of money they should make.
Yeah, now they're probably not going to be hit with, if they've not worked for 10 years, you're not going to expect them to get what an engineer 10 years experience, but they're going to get hit with something.
Right.
I mean, and I think that's the thing is that I think people assume that if you were a traditional homemaker, whether it's the husband or the wife, that somehow in a divorce, they're still going to allow somebody to have a role of homemaker. That's just not what the law envisions.
Divorce is messy.
It is messy.
It doesn't need to be as confrontational as sometimes it is, right?
I agree.
And it's a transparent world. You're not going to be able to hide assets. You hide assets, you're going to get into trouble. You need to fully disclose everything.
Correct.
And we joke that, it's family time during Thanksgiving time. Divorce is serious. Any of these kind of actions are very serious, should not be entered into lightly. And I know that my advice to folks always is to first work on trying to work it out themselves, to try to reconcile, because divorcing somebody You still have to deal with them if you have children.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, don't stay in a bad relationship if you don't need to be in one.
I learned, again, I think that having gone through a divorce, I think it probably made me better equipped to assist people through it. Again, not from the legal setting, but from more the personal side. And, having been through it with, at the time, smaller children, and sitting with a well-known person who counsels folks to help with children and therapy and all that. And I remember that person was very frank to and just said it, because it's real simple in life. You have a effed up marriage, you could have effed up kids. You go through an effed up divorce, you can have effed up kids. And the whole point was, whether you're married or divorced, the key is the more you can be civil and try to get along, you give your kids a better chance to succeed, to where they don't have their demons of what their parents created for them when they were young.
Any other urban legends out there that we should share over this Thanksgiving weekend as it relates to domestics?
Not that I'm aware of.
All right. Well, we appreciate everybody tuning in today. We're going to do a weekly show, whether you call this a podcast or a video. It's going to roll out at 11 a.m. every Friday. Some will be pre-recorded, some will be live. When we get a little more comfortable, we'll probably go live.
And maybe on site.
Yeah, and we'll move around on site, and we're going to have a many different topics. The kind of the idea of this is to just share a little light on law, share a little bit of light on current events, politics, nonpartisan. And next week's show, we're going to have a special guest with us, someone else other than us, who is going to talk with us about some of the new initiatives that are going to be entered into in Frankfurt this year, this upcoming session in Frankfurt. We're going to talk about the transition of power and all of the cabinet appointments and kind of behind the scenes legally what's going on in that. And then we're going to talk about a couple things that we've seen in city government. So next week will be a totally different flavor than this week. Please comment. Email, call, text, give us ideas for shows, give us ideas for special guests. We want to make this informative, entertaining, and educational, and try not to eat too much turkey.